talk to you. My sister, I was thinking this morning, in the last conference I went to, I saw you when we could actually hug and, right?
Remember hugging?
The COVID stuff was sort of, remember there was like a little buzz happening in the air, and it was like last February or March that.
And I think it was almost hard to believe. We put it out of our mind. We thought there was nothing that could be such a big thing as a pandemic. And when you look back on like 60 Minutes and they talked about Ebola, and I was like, wow, like that could have been big, but we just kept it so like, oh, it's been dealt with. It's okay. SARS came and then kind of left. So I think we had that same idea coming, that we weren't really, adhering to it. And whoa, has it stopped us in our tracks?
And who knew? I mean, we just had those whispers. But I remember sort of feeling a little uneasy, like at that conference. I was fine to hug you because I love you, but I was a little uneasy. Like, we're all just sort of sitting in like close proximity and all these things about this. Could it have? Could I just sort of think of like the monkey from Outbreak? Could somebody have been?
Oh my God!
I know.
I was in denial, so I have this like extreme innate need to be free in every capacity of the word. So the idea that I wouldn't be able to like go out, balance life with work hard, play hard, travel, I was in denial, which I'm not normally, but it's really tested. It's tested what balance is supposed to look like in a very different way. And to be honest, it's made me a better like mom, a better person, a better worker, because you have to find in your everyday balance. And if it's protected by you as your person, then you really have to dig deep and say, if I can't do all the other things that I perceived as balance, then what am I doing now? So it's been a good reflective moment for me, I have to say.
You say that because I just know you. And hi, Amy. Amy's saying, help my friend Amy. Because I know that you're like such a family mom. Like you are so like with your family, you're like right in there, and you're a go-getter. I've never seen anybody who's got energy like you. I mean, you're just always out there. It was like working out, play. Like you said, work hard, play hard. You're out there.
Yeah.
So everyone's had to sort of like, wow.
And it's interesting. A lot of people say that to me, and I really love it. I used to say to people, if I could bottle up my energy and sell it, I'd pay off my student debt. But what I do think was interesting is that you can't keep that up. And that role model, I am all about not having women have to live up to any other woman. And what I noticed was exactly this narrative is, Julia, you do it all and whatnot. And what I loved about COVID, especially being a D&I leader, was the ability to have a conversation to say, perhaps that wasn't the greatest either for me. And COVID stopped me and said, you need some calm time. So it was really it made me a better professional, because I didn't realize I was probably role modeling, not meaning to, but trying to live up to my own standard of doing everything. So I did some learning in that too.
Well, that's cool. So I'm going to introduce you, because we've already got right into it, right?
Yeah.
Who you are, because I already know you and I already know you're fabulous. So like if the people that are watching, this gorgeous gal and I met on a beach in Cuba and fell in love.
This is true.
And we just hit it off like a house on fire, because I guess we both are pretty chatty girls and pretty high energy and that kind of stuff. And our kids were the same age. And so, but that was a while ago. I mean, my little guys now, your boys are like young men now. And
16 and 14.
Right.
That was lovely, because I met your sister, and I always say that I'm in the business of people, but I truly love people. And when you meet other people, especially other like-minded, just open people, it's a wonderful opportunity when you travel.
Yeah. Oh God, we had so many laughs. And like the kids, it was so fun because the kids could sort of go off and play, which I'm a little bit of a mother hen. I kind of like, when Brady was little, I was always sort of like, so the kids sort of they had this sort of
freedom.
Perceived idea of freedom when you and I knew exactly where they were.
Because I love freedom, right?
All right. So Julia has had quite an amazing career with being, you're now the global manager of learning and inclusion at Cura Systems, which we're going to talk about. And I pulled this from your LinkedIn, that you're trailblazing how companies mobilize inclusion. And so you've got an undergraduate degree in philosophy, a master's in education, a law diploma, a certificate in professional ethics, and a certificate in data-driven decision-making. Holy pro. You're an internationally published author, a finalist for Ally of the Year 2020 Women in Tech. You've taught business executives at the University of West Indies on leadership, agility, and transforming to thrive. And I know you're an amazing keynote speaker, and you're a keynote speaker for the U.S. National Diversity Sophomore Summit on Diversity as Competitive Intelligence. And you sit on a governance committee for the board of for Ernestine's Women's Shelter, and you've also worked at Centennial College, the Canadian Bureau for International Education, and BMO. So now you're a Kira doing DNI. Yeah,
doing DNI.
Yeah. And I kind of wanted to lead off because I had messaged you before we started chatting today. I'm, like as a girl that's been born, we just did the genealogy of it. I'm like a 5th generation Canadian or 6th generation Canadian. And as a girl who's grown up in a very diverse neighborhood, I'm a Scarborough. Woo, go Scarborough.
Go Scarborough. I see Marcus on here too. He knows Scarborough too.
Right. Scarborough in the house, right? And so I grew up with such diversity, and it's so foreign to me when I find that my friends, other people that I know, especially my friends or my cousins in the States, that they don't live in such a diverse, I think, what a shame, what a shame, what a sad state of affairs that you haven't, my next door neighbor was Chinese, and my other best girlfriend down the street is Black, and my other girlfriend down the street, it's just, I grew up with such diversity that I think I'm educated about diversity, but I know as a white girl, I have no idea. So I just sort of want to put it out there because I know that I have bias. I know it. And I'm glad that we're having this discussion. So if I flub up and I say something stupid, that you can call me on it. People can call me on it because I want to have these discussions. I don't want to be naive to think that just because I sound like a Karen when I say some of my best friends were people of color, I don't want to sound like that person. But it's true. That's just the way that I was raised. It's just and so it's bizarre to me. I've been in experiences where my best guy friend in high school, Black guy, always pulled over. I was like, Sheldon, why? I never get pulled over. Why are you always getting pulled over? And those kind of situations where I'd come home to my parents and be like, what is happening with this? I think it's so bad and stuff like that. So I definitely am glad we're having these discussions because it is naive for white folks to think that it isn't happening out there, that racism isn't happening and that we aren't being as inclusive. Anyway, so having said that, having gotten all of my
out. Don't worry, you're in good hands. You're in good hands.
I know, you're going to take it easy on me. That you have been involved in diversity and inclusion for a very, very long time, long before it's now become this buzz term now, which is such a good thing. But you've been involved in this industry for a long time. So what made you choose to go in this route? What made you go this way?
It's always interesting when people say, what made you choose this route? But a couple of years ago, I'm 47, and I say a couple of years ago because I'm trying to play it down, but say 17 years ago, we didn't have dedicated resources in diversity and inclusion, and it certainly didn't get the kind of sexy attention it gets right now. So I guess the best way to answer that question is that the path kind of chose me. I certainly was a precocious child, and I think that in an adult looks like tenacity. I was incredibly, I'm going to say argumentative, but I wanted to debate and have conversations about certain things. And in a teen, that could look critical and reflective in an evolving professional. So it's all the way in which we look at it. And then I think I had this innate desire for fairness, inclusion, and kind of putting people first. Even as a kid, I see it in my youngest as just this little social justice warrior, naturally advocating for people. And I say, wow, that doesn't matter what age that looks like, you can kind of see it. So I think the path kind of chose me. The needle for me, though, has been threaded through kind of the legal field. Then you went to professional development and eventually led me finally, as all of the moons aligned, to what we have now, which is really full and robust positions for diversity and inclusion and organizations kind of dedicated to it. So how lucky am I? But the path has been kind of interesting so it found me and I took it on.
Well, you say, how lucky are you? But I know you as you're a very confident, you're beautiful. So of course everyone's going to look at you, but you're a very confident woman who just, your value. I just the person that I met, you've always been so, and with kindness, and there's, all those kinds of things. So I don't think it's necessarily luck. I think that you've radiated that, and it's come full circle. So okay, so with diversity and inclusion, has it been difficult? Have these discussions been difficult in the workplace? Because as I said, like, as a little, white girl, I'm not a little white girl, I'm an old white girl now, but as a white girl, it is like, I'm nervous about making the wrong step. Like, how are these discussions difficult?
Yeah, I want to say, just in general, that when we talk about just understanding diversity and inclusion in the space, and especially look at the last couple of years, we looked at George Floyd, we've looked at, sadly, what happened with our Muslim community just recently and locally here. When we look at the state of Israel, which we see a lot of companies don't even want to touch and talk about, it's not a white person thing. So I really want to take that out of the conversation, because there's just so many complexities to diversity and inclusion where we all don't know what to say. Okay. So a lot of people who don't know me know my husband's Jewish. And so people might think I automatically side to one or the other. And not only that, I have that kind of post-colonial background understanding of it. And that still doesn't make it so I know, or I'm comfortable talking about it. So pushback is normal, because we fear that we're going to say the wrong thing. We fear we don't know. We don't feel it has a place in what we have to discuss. That's okay. So pushback is, like, historically been the experience that I've always been met with over the years. I have noticed, though, when we talk about kind of the 2.0 things that we do know, anti-racist training and whatnot, it doesn't matter what race. Like, I can't speak on the Black community. I am an other, trying to be an advocate and ally. But that's actually the point, is even if we talk about those fearful things like white privilege, if you're a D&I leader that's worth your weight, if you think about it, the point is, we're not doing blame, shame, or guilt. We want to advance those conversations to allyship and advocacy and how to support. And I have to say that people show up for that. The more you say those words means it's a responsibility we all have to do something, to recognize something. And it's not always publicly. So the fear also happens that, must we be public? Do I have to say something? So listen, like, a revolution has many lanes. And how you choose to do that sometimes is just sitting back and checking out 60 Minutes, or looking online and saying, let me educate myself on that. So, I really want to change that kind of conversation. It's not a white person thing. We're all in it, learning with all the nuances that are coming that I may not have any experience in.
Well, thank you, because that is insightful for me, because I think I do have a bit of white guilt, right? Like, of like, how do I make this better? How do I not just sort of sit around and just, like, be complacent about it? I don't want to be complacent about it. At the same time, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say sometimes, and I'm mindful of the language that I use sometimes, because Americans might use, like, African American, but I'm like, so how do we use that? How do we use the proper terminology here when we're not American? And so it is tough when I'll take my ownership for myself, when I'm doing my best to be as inclusive as possible, right? And be mindful of it.
I think also the space that I have the responsibility of as a professional in this is to create the space where fear is okay to have, and let's deal with that. And that, just like you're saying to me, Leslie and I, when we chatted, she's like, I'm a little bit nervous about having this conversation, but that is exactly where you want to start, because you're saying, I'm not pretending to know anything. All I'm asking is, I want to know more. What a beautiful space to be in, when either you have privileges or not. And so that already, we're seeing an advancement in the evolutions, that at least I know I'm a glass half full. I'm certainly not a person who has their head in the sand. I mean, I see what's going on. But I think that's one of the things that it's worked for me in this space, was actually opening up to say, I'm not here to say this is wrong, or how you say that, or you've used something that somebody may think is politically incorrect. I'm not calling anybody out. I recently had a friend that had used the word, and pardon it, but colored. And I said to her, that has a lot of connotations in historical context that now we don't use. That's how you speak about that. She said, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. And I said, it's okay. Like, that's what we're here to do. Your intention was not to harm. Right. And so next time she'll call me and say, hey, look, I'm thinking of doing this. Like, what do you think of that? You've created this space for that conversation, so that we're not always feeling, that's my responsibility, I think, in being on this path that apparently chose me.
Well, and so it's okay to use the word people of color, but just not, because there is.
And I think that's, what's beautiful about it is when we talk about specific, like when people say I'm colorblind, right? And I say, I know where you're heading with that, but people don't want to not be seen with their color. I mean, we're talking, and one of the things I'm able to do is speak on my community because of my color, which is an amazing card that I get to play and get that chance when this card before was never able to be on the table. And it's okay. So let's recognize color, but rather than depending on how we say it, like all communities are saying, the Black community, the Indo-Caribbean community. And if you don't know, say, what is the right term? Because I care so much about respecting, but I just hear so many things.
Yeah.
Like, let's sit in that space, right?
I used to joke with some of my friends growing up of like, this is a stupid white girl question. I'm sorry. Like, I'm going to put it out there because I don't know. And so I mean, my friends would always have like, they would realize that I was coming from a good place. Right. But I asked the questions. I'd be like, tell me about this. And so again, I didn't want to seem like I was ignorant. I mean, I am ignorant.
So am I about a lot of things. Yeah.
But it's like, help me understand a little bit better and call me on my nonsense. Like if I say things that are inappropriate, please tell me that I'm being inappropriate.
Yeah. In a kind manner. I mean, I think that's what builds the trust of someone saying, there's some people, and that's okay to say, it's not my responsibility to educate you. It's your responsibility to educate yourself on what's going on. And I claim that space because they're saying that, and they're saying that's psychologically exhausting. That's the capital exhausting to me. But I think, my role being in a D&I leader means come to me and let me support where you can learn or educate on that. And if I don't know, I'll tell you that, and that's okay too.
Yeah, it's nice. I went to it was a while ago when we were still hanging out and stuff like that, and they have like Lean in Canada has a panel for men about how to bring in inclusivity, and it was a very interesting. Yeah, it was really great to see these like strong men, because they're walking into a room like of a few hundred women that are sitting there like, you know what I mean? Like, okay, go guys, and it's like, oh, you're in the firing squad. But the fact that they're there and they show up and they want to be a part of the conversation and want to drive things. And one of my clients, Franklin Templeton, the CEO there, is very much involved in diversity and inclusion. He wanted to make that very prominent on his LinkedIn profile. And I was like, I love it. This is amazing. Like, let's go. Let's continue to drive this.
Yeah. And that's the place, right? Like he also has like, a power dynamic being at that level, right? So you also are using, once again, certain access and privilege to create space. And that's what I mean about when we talked originally about pushback, those conversations now, say about white privilege, are now evolving to advocacy, allyship, and support. And then you're actually seeing, I feel strong enough that I may not be that person to represent, but I can create the space to do that. I know many, if we're talking about gender, I know many men that one of them is on here. I called him again, Marcus. He's an incredible champion for females, making space. He's even on a meeting, I know I'm hoping not to embarrass him. He actually said, hold on one second. I think you were saying something, Julia. It's the idea of not being interrupted. Women are interrupted 32% of the time. I have 2 boys at home and a husband. As much as I love them, this does happen. All I wanted was the ketchup. But the point is how kind is that, right? And that space matters so much to me. So
right, because it's unconscious a lot of the time too, right, Julie?
Yeah.
Like, it's unconscious that we don't necessarily like, people don't necessarily see how they might be dismissing other people for whatever.
Right. And that's why it's unconscious, right? And that's why we have a lot of conversations about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So you did recently did a podcast with the Women Talk Tech entitled Crossing the Line. So again, I think we've just discussed this, but how can people begin to have these discussions about inclusivity if they're nervous or afraid? I think you kind of said like it's kind of just being open and having the confidence. Actually, I think part of it is having the confidence to have these discussions, because what I see in the circles that I hang out, anybody that I know that does have racial undertones to the things that they're talking about, it's all in fear. Yeah. It's so much fear. It's so much like this is just the way things were. Why do things have to change?
And I also approach it that way, that the intention is unknown at first, which I think is great. But to answer the question, the Women Talk Tech podcast was about crossing the line. And I think I'm going to answer kind of 2 questions folded in there, which was, how do we have those conversations? And one of them was about vulnerability. And I think we talked a little bit about that, whereas I don't really know, but I want to support. Some of the things that I've done internally where I am currently was actually creating something, saying, depending on the event that's happening, we may be from aware to active to an advocate. Like, where are we? Where do we stand? And where are some tips? Sometimes the tips, once again, is the idea of just educating myself. That's how I'm here. But you start at this place of vulnerability, no matter what level or industry you're in. Curiosity to learn is an excellent foundation for, becoming this person of inclusion that's safe to come to. And then talking about the podcast, which I absolutely love. It's one of the things I talked about was courage, organizational courage. It's the other C-suite word. And just championing a lot of work, I think, really is important. But I can work as hard as I like overwork. I can influence and inspire others that can walk with me. We can have a powerful EREG. You can have many committees, but if you don't have executive and leadership buy-in from the top as a priority, it just remains a project. And crossing the line was, how are we able to cross the line in organizational courage to make this a priority? And then it was like, also very literal, which is the idea of the boardroom itself is often kept for big decision making. And although you can be communication and transparent about what's happening, the idea is we need, as D&I leaders, to actually cross that line and be in that table. And also, if there is a voice that we're advocating for of our employee base, they need to be there as well. Because once again, as a D&I leader, I don't speak for every community. So why not have an employee of that community cross that line when we're making decisions? So it's a pretty powerful thing. I love the word crossing the line, and the Women Talk Tech talked a little bit more about it, but that's a great kind of like, little mantra in there about, my rah-rah.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And I another client that I had who's a very senior leader in media, one of the things that she enlightened me about is, and she's focusing now on empowering women in media, because it's the people who have the purse strings or the pockets or however you say it, the people with the budgets really control the power. So you maybe have those people at the table, but if you don't have the money, there's like a little different, there's a bit of a different dynamic there. So
it's interesting you say that. When I jumped off of academia and I went into the finance, which is considered a very like systemic, colonized, right, institution, a lot of people in the very deep D&I space was like, wow, that's a little corporate-y and kind of like a sellout kind of way. Not that they said that, but that's like kind of the essence of it. But my point was that I had seen in the last couple of years, the banks really advancing great work, at least from the outside, but they also had the money to put behind it. And I thought that was one of the reasons why is the purse strings means rubber hits road and we can actually do things. Not everything's perfect. Not any industry is perfect, but that's an interesting example that you brought up and one of my experiences in my professional career.
Yeah, it is interesting. And so it's kind of, it's good to see that this is, at least we're having these discussions. And so here's kind of a personal question, but I did send this to you in advance, so you wouldn't get this. So as a person, pardon me?
Blindsided.
Yeah, exactly. So as a person of color, have you ever had to face diversity issues, like either personally or professionally?
I loved that you said, I was like, whoa, I don't even know if anybody would really ask me this in a podcast.
Oh, really? Because that was something that I was nervous about asking too, is that I've been an external participant to see it happen. As I said, like when I was in high school, I've seen racism with my own two eyes. But then I'm like, but is this, like, anyway, it's a whole bigger discussion. So I'll just let you finish before I start going in. And
yeah, I love that I actually had to think about it because I've got like grade school stuff where you get called names and sure, that's racism, but I think you were looking for something more complex. I have to say, and we've had I've had different conversations with different people when I've done any consultation work or whatnot, is like, well, that's racist. I said, sometimes, it's what the outcome was, but the intention we have to get behind. We don't excuse it. And so I can't always confirm the intention of every act that has been, but I have experienced ageism, which I think included other layers of discrimination, meaning either female, either my color, for sure. So early in my career after mat leave, so I came off of 5 years of mat leave. So I know you talk about me being confident, and I am in who I am, but when it comes to newness, especially coming out as motherhood, not having the education that everybody did in academia at the time, there was imposter syndrome that was happening. The reason why they chose me, which was so real, was because I didn't have all of that stuff. They said, you actually appeal to our client base and our student base, who are mature students, who are parents, who are coming second career. So they chose me for all of those things that I was being judged on against. And I'm sure possibly back then, even maybe now, color adds into it, perhaps. And I was often outright asked, just in my hello, I'm introducing global citizenship or whatnot, you know, do you have the credentials to be teaching us as experts? And that's okay. Like, this is what happened a long time ago. Or, you know, I'm an expert in my—
It's not really okay, but
so for me, I was never personally offended because I knew what it was. So when you give language to something, you know where it's operating from. I don't allow it. So I said, as soon as you put your CV forward, I'm happy to put mine. So I'm certainly not a wallflower on the responses of it. But, you know, I think that there are some layers of marginality and discrimination that certainly had a place in that. But I've certainly felt ageism a lot. I have to say, as the one that comes up the most to me.
Because I feel like it's kind of funny because well, you and I both kind of look younger than we are. So I was always I was always told when I was younger, I was always like, "You're so young, you don't know." Like, so maybe even that in that ages, and I'm like, "Oh, honey, like I'm a lot older than I look," you know, which is.
But that's the learning, right? That's what I mean about diversity. People go right to race, and I'm like, we're all learning, because I will see some. Look, I'm going to tell you right now how I still walk with imposter syndrome. Anybody who knows me, my hair is incredibly long. It's longer than what they say the adult woman average professional would have when you look at lookism, right? My hair is down to my waist. But when I am often presenting, when I am on any kind of professional scenario of any kind where you can see me, I always put my hair in a bun. And I realize, and I know I do it, but I still do it. And the reason for that is because of those kinds of issues that you still walk with. So you still walk with those. Yeah.
Yeah, and in some ways, and this is my own thing is because my mother's always telling me, cut your hair. Like, she's like, once you get to a certain age, I'm turning 51 this year. So she's like, she's like, you need to cut it shorter.
Exactly. It's generational. Exactly.
But, you know, and for me, it's like, for me, like, it's what I'm comfortable with. And I don't care. I'm like, I don't care. Look at
that's right.
You know.
Yeah. Now look at this conversation where you're talking about diversity. You're talking about all the different isms. What you can do is have somebody that's experienced in D&I. I'm not like know everything. And then you're saying, look at me, I'm a white girl who doesn't know anything. But what you do is you find your common ground of where we both are like, oh yeah, I see. That's what you do. You create the space of learning and where do we align and vulnerability. And then you're off to the races.
And how are we more similar than dissimilar, really?
That's correct. How do we humanize, right, the isms to know perhaps we feel that. We have veterans that are actually marginalized communities, designated marginalized communities, white and any other color of veterans that have served. And when we look at it, the reason why is for their political thoughts. Dr. Kenji Yoshino does an amazing job of inclusion work. And he says inclusion is truly inclusion. No one is left. And when we look at that, so we really have to look at inclusion work as not a white and everyone else color against. It's not about that. It's about finding alignments, right? And how we can
feel a little bit better, Julia. It makes sense.
I'm glad. That's my work here is done.
I love it. I love it. So what do you think are some of the misconceptions that people have about what you do? I'm sure I have absolutely no idea what it is that you do. I just
One thing I love about the role that and they promised me and said, make sure that you're good at you're good at ambiguity. And I actually love ambiguity, which is the idea of starting something based on the passion and the organization that's already showing, right? Something to nurture. And so in the role, which is just this beautiful title of learning and inclusion, it's supporting and inspiring a culture of inclusion, meaning everybody's in it to win it in terms of learning and wanting to share experiences. But how do we kind of create a formality of that? Where are there areas where I can start to inspire somebody to come and share that because it's best for everybody else to learn or to know and we didn't know? So hopefully I'm doing that in a good way. And then the other component of that, which kind of evolved out of that and my background in love, evolved from some of the needs of the employees and the importance the executive saw in inclusion work. So how can we do different things with the launch of the employee resource group that we did in 2020? It took about 6 months to bring with 12 strong strategic collective mandates that the executives backed, which was how can we create a culture of inclusion internally? And so that's kind of what I do. The misconception of diversity was probably exactly how we opened up, that I'm going to be called out and she's going to call me out. Or what's hard, I think sometimes, is when you sit in an executive room and, you know, there's this push to discomfort. And that is true. So that's not a misconception. That is true. I think the misconception component is it will push you past your capability to do so. Mm-hmm. And that's not what I do. It is getting us to the point where maybe we don't post what we need to do, post external. What we need to do is be able to take a step back and go, why don't we? Let's talk about diversity numbers, for example. This is always a hot topic for every organization. Some organizations don't want to do diversity numbers. Some do. Some do it internally. Some do it out. One of the things we talk about as diversity numbers are not to shame the people in the positions. What it is to do is to say, I didn't know that. Or say you already know that. What it is to say, so how can we do better? Because sharing it even internally means we stand in that fire with everybody and saying, we got to do better together. That's okay. So the misconception of what I do is that I'm going to push you, or we're going to be, championing you way out of your comfort level. And it's not. We're walking side by side to do better.
Yeah, because okay, that makes a lot of sense. Because as you were talking about that too, I think I've had a few discussions with I know I've had a few discussions with men that I know that are in those senior leadership roles, that now that the women are in the offices and things like that, and because of the Me Too movement and because of, then they're like, can I say you look really pretty today? Is someone taking offense to that, or is that me being nice? And they're like, I don't even know what to do anymore, because some things, because I mean, you and I are both flirts. We would go and be like, hey, how you doing? You look so cute. But you think there's men now that are like, is that crossing the line? Or women going to be like, I didn't show up here looking cute for you. I did this for myself. And it's like, do I do it? Do I not do it? How do I have these discussions? Are you facing any of that, with
To be honest, I've heard it not internally in more professional settings. I've heard it actually from friends. So that doesn't mean internal settings. Maybe they're afraid to say, but I don't see that happening often enough. If anything, it's more unintentional microaggressions that may happen, but not with the Me Too movement. I think there's been a sensitivity that if you're not sure to say, don't say. And I think that goes both ways, because I also say, like, I tend to want to say, if we're in a very relaxed environment and say we're meeting at a conference, I would say to somebody normally, even a male, wow, you clean up nice. That's really nice. But now that's probably not what I would say. And I don't feel sensitive about it. What I've said is perhaps that's just not what we need to say right now. And that's all. It's just this sensitivity. I know people find it really, really difficult because they don't know any other way to express endearment. And so that's okay. We just find different ways, right? So think about it now. It used to be, hey, you've got a nice set of gams. And which is legs for anybody who's way younger than me. But we don't say that in the environment. It now was, wow, you look great. So now it's changing to something else. But I think that's just the pendulum needs to swing, and it often does, right? When we look at, a lot of times people talk about affirmative action and how it failed and it wasn't. I understand what you're saying, but the pendulum needs to swing for us to find this balance. But if it was all the way one way, and it's got to swing all the way one way before we figure it out. So we've got to endure this discomfort and unknowing till we get to here. And
well, thank you for that, Julie. That's really insightful, because you're right. Those conversations are difficult, and we're in different generations, right? Yeah. We have people that are still sort of like, well, that's just not the way we did things in the past. Right. And that's always the way that it's going to be when you have multi-generations in a specific work environment, in any kind of social environment, really, quite frankly. And having those difficult discussions with people that, well, that's just not the way I was raised.
Right.
Those conversations.
Yeah. I've got a couple of things though that it wasn't like, I could say that it wasn't, and I could always give those, like, that's the thing, right? Is that I'm really comfortable putting myself on the spot of, this is the fail, or this is where I can see what you're saying, or, hey, I grew up like that too. I get it. Right. Or how do I be like sweet to you without offending you, and that's okay. You can also say that. And I think that's where I've really grown as a professional in the work of D&I is standing in the fire of not being the expert, but actually sharing in the vulnerability and unknown with other people
What's kind of neat too, Julie, I've noticed with my own kid, and even with my college students, is they'll call me out if I say something that happened to be a colloquialism when I was younger, like something that I mean completely innocently, but I'm not going to say them. But there's terms that I have sometimes said, and then I want to, I can't believe I just said that. They go, no. Like they won't just let it slide. Like my kid will call me on stuff when I'm kind of even just being playful here in the house and saying something that, you know, like they weren't racial terms. They were just sort of terms about, whatever.
They're not racial terms. I'm like, yes, I know you. Like just putting it out there. You're so amazing.
So again, I'm kind of going into that like, you know, but I have said things that were inappropriate that my kid will be like, Ma, you can't talk like that. Like you can't say those words. And it's kind of interesting and neat because even if I'm being playful, he's like, I'm not having it. You know?
And there you go. You have an advocate who just by design, the social narrative has changed, which is why we're able to say if we're of that community that's marginalized, or if we are of a dominant community and being advised of, is the narrative has changed. Now it depends on the community. It depends on the geography. It depends on the country and the culture and the citizenship and what we have, I have to say, that comfortability. But I do think the narrative, I'm going to keep it to Canada and in certain organized, because we can already see that nation and harm and hate that still continues. So I don't want to just blanket Canada. It's very systemic here still. But at least we have at least we're seeing some of the open narratives happen.
Yeah. And I don't think I was ever more like growing up, as I'm sure you have, going back and forth to the States a lot, I kept thinking, oh, we're just the neighbors to the north. But in the past 2 years, I really realized how different. I know that's a whole bigger picture story that we don't necessarily want to get into. But I am shocked a little bit, I guess, again, because I have grown up with being in an inclusive environment, being, you know, even though I'm a white gal, I was there wasn't as many white people in my class as there were non-whites in my class. And that's what I grew up with. So that to me is just, doesn't everybody else have that experience? And then to find out that, you know, the cultures in very, like, especially like, let's say New York City, where my cousins are from, that the pockets are, oh no, the people of color live in this area, and then the white people live in it. And I'm like, wait, we're talking 20, you know, we're talking 2020s here. We're not talking like, it just, to me, is just, it's just strange. It's just strange, but you know, what are you going to do? And I just didn't realize how different the two countries were. And I know Canada still obviously has a very long way to go. We're certainly not immune to the crap that we do, but and you know, but I think, I don't know, I'd like to think that the Canadians seem to, at least my friends, my circle of friends, want to hold other people accountable for bad behavior. Insofar as like things that have happened in the past, we're like, I just see so much, especially going on with the Indigenous communities now, and people like rallying and supporting that community too. You know, it's nice to see that, you know, that when we hurt, like when other people hurt, that we hurt with them. Like, if that makes sense, like.
It does, but one of the things that I'm not like a poo-poo on Canada by any means, but I am certainly a realist when it comes to it. I am a glass full. I think it's very different, our approaches and our histories, and some of the history that's actually to the surface in the US, and some things that we only talk about quietly here, and we don't really know a lot about it in terms of how bad some of the things that we've done historical wise. I think that we are on, I'm not going to say a bandwagon, but we were certainly on much more of an emotional and collective consciousness since COVID to celebrate these things. But to celebrate it and put it out there is not enough, because this is not a new issue. So a lot of people don't know, when a lot of the Asian hate had risen and it still continues to be there, this is just a resurgence of it. But a lot of people didn't know that it's actually 50% more violent acts happened in Canada more than the States in terms of statistics. People were like, what? I had no idea. And then the other thing is that when we look at our First Nations, like, it is just crazy how long this has gone on with the pipeline. You have water issues. Residential schooling just closed in 1996, the very last one. We've been championing National or Indigenous Month longer than that, but we only closed the last school in 1996. So you may say, well, okay, we closed it, but we didn't. Well, the last graduate was 1995. So we need to really step back sometimes and think about, like, I don't know if we're better or worse. And I don't want to, we've made advancements, which are great, but we have a lot of learning to do about the reality of what's here.
100%, 100%. And I was actually watching, the Red Table Talk with
Jada Pinkett.
Jada Pinkett, which is so, she had a really interesting talk with the Asian community as well, as when you bring up that stuff, because I didn't realize that like, again, like thinking about, okay, so if you're a minority, then you support other minorities. And I didn't realize how the Black community and the Asian community don't like each other at all. And like, not, I'm saying like generalities, but that there, I was like, I had no idea that there was anger issues amongst those two communities. I would have thought, oh, well, one minority, I'm a minority, so I'm going to support another minority.
Right.
And that's not necessarily the case. That there's racism even amongst different communities, which I was like,
yeah. So I didn't watch that one, and I'm not really sure what the nuance is, like if there's a particular sub community within that community. So forgive me, because I'm always mindful of how I speak on something I may not know, or some of the complexities that came up. But why don't I take it back out a little bit, is not every, when you're looking at women, for example, and they've said traditionally women are more competitive with each other. The reason why post-colonial, vote, post-advancement is there was very little room for us to be able to advance. And sometimes some of the approaches were to actually be competitive with, because of that being advantageous. And when you look at shadeism, right, colorism as they used to call it, but shadeism now, and classism in the West Indies, right, based on the slave trade coming in, based on indentureship coming in, there was a fight for resources. So that was actually structural and systemic that came in and up because of the scenarios that happened. And what you want to do now, and you see that, is all of this continuation. Sometimes I don't know the history that they're speaking of, to be honest, but I can take it back to, we're seeing a lot of rhetoric now about women support women, women bring leaders up, bring each other up, women. We started to change that narrative as we see more women hopefully going up to the top. We're starting to go, we can't do this because we're not helping. And that's what we want to hear all the time, in all different areas that we've actually seen our histories has created this system.
And it's interesting that you brought that, because a friend of mine, and I just, this metaphor that she said, was just kind of like, oh my gosh. She said sometimes some women, to your point, like when they climb the corporate ladder, they'll pull the ladder up behind them. And I was like, whoa, like that's interesting, because I've worked with some of those women. I've worked with some of those women who want to keep the other women down, and the competitiveness and all that other stuff. And I find, as we know with bullies, it's the hurt people. It's the people that have insecurities that don't want to help other people rise. Yeah, that's tough.
I am happy to say, like, I had done it was Women in Technology. I had done for the Women IT Awards, and I had done a fireside chat. Well, it was not a fireside chat, sorry, it was like a conversation and presentation. And I was so happy to see that rhetoric change right across the board. And it was women supporting women, and you have more of those. It was attended by 500 people. And we're seeing more of that. And I'm hoping that, as Mandela says, right, the one match, shines light on so much darkness. And after a while, it's going to change. So it starts to emanate. But it's important that when you're trying to understand, when people do something, you have to understand the history where it comes from. It doesn't excuse. What it does is educates us to say, how can I take away this feeling of threatened so that they feel they can build together, right?
And are you noticing too, and this is kind of, I don't know if this goes beyond, because I didn't ask you this question ahead of time, but it's where my brain is going, noticing that brands are now embracing this. Now company, organizations, brands are hopefully starting to embrace a little bit more, like the Dove natural beauty, and bringing in people, bringing in a diversity into its advertisements, into television, things like that. I think that it's also doing a lot for.
Yeah. At the Sophomore Summit, I actually spoke about diversity as competitive intelligence, and not to water it down by any means, and sanitize diversity. What it's saying is you're going to be left behind if you don't really get that this is actually a part of the talent labor movement. I talked about Johnson & Johnson, and in, I can't remember, it was 21 or 1920s. I think his name was Herbert. I can't remember his last name, actually realized that his wife was getting a lot of cuts. And he was like, this is ridiculous, and tried to bandage her up. And she found it was really ridiculous. And she took them off in the kitchen. She got a lot of cuts. So then he was actually an employee of Johnson & Johnson and actually created the bandages. And so if you look at the bandages, it took 100 years for them to now launch the different colors of bandage for our skin. Well, we've actually had like the Tulsa Massacre. We've had civil rights movements. We've had Martin Luther King. We've had many, many evolutions and speakers and advocates that have been very, very like public political figures. Why didn't we do it then? So right now is becoming this revolution, is what I talk about. And I think that's super important. Same with Lego, just launched female scientists. Well, we actually have a female scientist. Out of all the Nobel Prize winners, 91 of them, only 4 have won it twice. 1 was a woman, and she won it in 1910 and then 1913. So you're only not doing it now, women scientists. It's because now you're going to be left behind if you don't do it. So let's do that right.
Yeah, absolutely. Because people, their wallets are they're voting with their wallets for sure, and organizations. And I do notice that. And I, as someone who really wants to empower people in the offices to become brand ambassadors, provide these opportunities to share these great stories, right? And I think that there are organizations out there. Another friend of mine who works at McDonald's was able to tell his coming out story and that kind of stuff, and being able to do that in a corporate forum and in a professional way, and being able to do that, I think is a way to go, right? Like, I love to see that that's happening, that there's, let's come away from the fears of just, being inclusive and telling the stories for sure.
And it's not that it's not altruistic, but there's a reason to be able to create that space as well, because they're being competitive. So they're saying we have the space to do it. I think it's incredible for us to learn, but it's also meaning that we are demonstrating we're diverse and having those conversations. So it's twofold. And I think only now, that's what I mean by competitive intelligence, is you're falling by the wayside if you're not creating these spaces to do so. So that's actually a really wonderful thing that's happened in the last couple of years.
And I'm sure that I've read, and I'm terrible with keeping numbers in my head, but I'm sure that I've read that having a more diverse leadership, like all that inclusivity, is better, not only just from the bottom, like it does financially, because you have more people at the table that provide more perspectives. Have those conversations is only going to lift the entire community up as and the organization itself.
Yeah, I think about it always as the idea of we're always trying to be innovative and competitive. And when we look at, just say, a diversity of experience, which we don't talk a lot about, if you bring out diversity of experience, and I don't mean in terms of economic or academic experience, you're bringing, well, this is how we did it in a total different sector. However, what if we did that here? So just think of it in terms of an innovative and brainwave moment. That is how diversity can really champion, if you allow it to do so. And I talk about it totally not in race, totally not in gender or sex or orientation, but in the idea of experience. So,
because it's like, there was a metaphor that somebody said to me years ago. It's like the Beatles, on each one of them as a musician was amazing, but you bring them together and they became the Beatles. So, the same thing about bringing more opinions, more different perspectives on things. And let's make sure that we're doing this properly, because there have been, and I talk with some of my students that are in public relations about those fails that, like, I think there was a few different fails where I think it was even Dove, when they had the girl taking, so the people were taking the t-shirt.
Yeah, they've done well because from their fail, right? Yeah, and that was actually what I was going to say, is that you've got to sometimes do that mistake and then redo. There's been a lot of people who have, posted different things that were probably perceived as insensitive, and they've said, sorry, we have to learn, we have to take a step back. But when we talk about diversity, if you even, look at Queen, right? The band Queen, and how they decided to like take on Freddie, and the idea of he was just all him. And that was what Queen was, right? And they were one step ahead of that. If you look at the Black Eyed Peas, a lot of people don't know that. And they're like a hip hop kind of pop 40s. And a lot of people don't know that they actually took on a girl, right? Fergie, and And it actually changed their whole dynamic and actually catapulted them to the top, not only because of her, but because of the difference that she added with all of them together. So when you look at diversity, I always want to move always, not necessarily always in race, should we say it's diversity, truly diversity, and seeing how that works and how people have done it.
Yeah. Okay, so only because I have a few more questions, and we've only got about 10 more minutes, if you can believe this. So you do a lot of stuff. You've been involved in leadership for a long time. So you studied about it. You've talked about leadership. What makes a good leader?
I love this question. I'm gonna say it's the concept of servant leadership, and it's not new. It's certainly not new. It's been used so much, but I don't always truly see it in action, and I don't think it's easy to serve when you feel like you need to lead. And I get that, but if you're able to serve, you do more than lead. You inspire change. You promote self-efficacy of others. And essentially, you're changing the culture of the organization. Servant leaders often have others that are speaking about them and their leadership. And I think that is, really, really undervalued and underutilized. If any kind of leader I'd like to be, I would like to be servant leader. I actually saw now I'm forgetting her name. She's a political figure, very, again, young, but fantastic and powerful. Oh, I can't believe I forgot her name. And they were making fun of her because she was a waitress before, and they were saying, you need to go back to waitressing. Yeah.
I know those initials, AOC.
Yes, AOC.
Yeah.
Forgive me if she ever were to see this. Hopefully she does. One of the most powerful things, and I was a waitress actually before, and I said, this is something that I think every child should experience, is some kind of service, like in the public service, customer service, something. And she said, my job, even in what I'm doing now as a public servant, is to serve. So telling me to go back to be a waitress is not an insult to me. And I thought, how powerful. And I posted it on my Twitter. And all I put was this, like this. And that is a couple of weeks ago, months ago, before I even knew you'd ask me this question. So servant leadership is definitely what I would say I don't see enough of, but wow, when you do it well, people are talking about you.
100%. Alexandra Cortez?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, I'm so awful. I'm good with numbers, not with names now, but okay.
I'm the opposite.
I love her.
And I 100%. And the leaders that I've interviewed, oftentimes what they'll say to me too is, because I'll say, what kind of a leader are you? What kind of leadership do you want to, do you represent your leader? Do you want to represent yourself as? And they'll say, I want to train the person to take over my job. Right. But how are you going to do that? So what type of leader does that? That's my next question. What type of leader does that? I'm going to create the safe space for you to fail forward, get up again. I'll protect you. Right? Do I have the ability to do that? Put myself on the line for that? Do I have the executive sponsorship to say, this is what I'm trying to do? Do you mind letting me do that and supporting me through it? It's actually having that polish and conversation to advocate for that space of growing leaders. So it's not an easy thing to do, right? Like, I recognize it's not easy to serve when you feel like you need to lead. And maybe that comes with time, wisdom, experience. I don't know, just chutzpah. Maybe just we're born with a lot of chutzpah. But so I'm not saying it's necessarily easy, but when you get your groove of it, and I'm certainly hoping that I get my groove more and more as I go, because it feels great. It feels great. Yeah, and those leaders and those ones that I have worked with, because I've been asked that question, the leadership, and the ones that I've been most inspired by are the ones that, to your point, have motivated and inspired me. They haven't been the micromanagers. Right. They've been the ones that have allowed me to fail, have said, let's learn from this. Didn't blame me for it, brought to my attention if I'd made a mistake, and then moved on and didn't keep going, well, you remember when you screwed up that time. You remember when you screwed up. Yeah, that's it. Those are the ones that I would stay till, whatever hours of the night. You need me to stay, I will bend over backwards. I will do whatever I can because you inspire me to be a better version of myself. And thus leading, right? When someone wants to do the work for you, thus leading. Yeah. As opposed to the micromanager who's like, you did this wrong, you did that wrong. Yeah. Or not even to that extreme, but just the traditional leadership. And there's nothing wrong with traditional leadership. It's just we need to be more. We need to be more when you ask, what makes a good leader to me. Yeah. Yeah, and I guess in the fine line too in leadership is some people need to have a fire lit underneath their butt, and some people just need to be inspired, because it's finding that right way of being able to do that. Yeah. And I couldn't be the person to be like throwing the hand. I couldn't do it. That's why I don't have employees. So I'm not a bad guy. Like I always.
But you inspire in other ways, right? Because you can be a peer leader too, right? And you certainly inspire in other ways. So I see that for sure.
That's my goal. Even being a mom, I have to be a leader, right? But I realized, I just said to myself the other day too, and I probably even said it to my kid, was like, my job isn't to be the boss of you. I mean, I am the boss of you, but that's my job is to be your Sherpa. I said, like,
I love it.
It's like guide him, right? Because as we know, like if kids want to be shady, they're gonna go off and be shady. We were kids once too. We know what it's like. If you want to hide stuff, you're going to hide stuff. And the same thing goes for employees. If they want to do stuff and they want to screw around and all that other stuff. But for me, it's being that guide and being sort of that beacon to make him feel like he can come to me to talk to me about things.
That's right.
And that it is that supportive place that if he's struggling with something, he can come to me and I can provide him with insights. But as I said, like if he wants to do shady stuff, he's just going to go underground if I tell him he can't. But that's just the way I roll.
Yeah, but it's well said, right? Like well said in terms of that's who we're trying to be, even in our professional lives or as friends, right? Is to serve, right? Oh, I think I froze here a little bit. I think we froze. I'm not sure. Let's come back. Oh, I think maybe she got cut off. I'm not sure. Yes, that's actually true. I'm not sure if I'm frozen or she got cut off and came out, but Stephen, I saw what you wrote. A great thing about experiences, you can have a negative experience with management that you can then use to know what not to be. Actually, I've had a lot of experiences where there were certain things where I knew how it made me feel. And even though I may not be managing somebody with the same kind of personality, I knew that I didn't want to make them feel that way, that they're allowed to have their own space, even though it's not similar to me in terms of actualizing. So that's one of the things that I took away from just in my own experience. So it's 2:59 and I'm not sure if we're still streaming live or not, or if she got, oh, I am still live. Am I? Thanks for letting me know. I think she probably got cut off. So I know Leslie wanted to ask me one last question. I'm happy she sent it to me and then I will let everybody go. And thank you for everybody for joining. I'm kind of like going to finish this off for her. She had asked me, do I have any last words, a mantra, belief, or motivational phrase? And I was thinking about it and it's something that I often say, but I'm going to kind of read it because I actually wrote it out. I truly believe in it and I wanted to get it right and say it as we end off this, which is, Authentically championing diversity and inclusion is demonstrating competitive intelligence. It spans the ethos of the organization from retention to performance to brand. But most important, it's the human connection to employees. And what better work is that? The DEI leaders, any D&I leader in any organization, no matter their level, if they are truly a leader, should have a standing seat at the decision table, not a folding chair. And they should be advocating in the right areas for the right people and for everyone. So a truly inclusive brand of equity and inclusion. So I hope that inspired. Thank you so much for saying some kind, nice things. Sorry for the 5 minutes. I was just staring there. I didn't know if we were on. Appreciate everybody who's joined. And thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Leslie, for asking me. This was really fantastic. A joy to my week, I have to say. And the candid conversation was just amazing. That space of vulnerability that even Leslie came with created a space for learning for all of us. So I thank you very much for that. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We'll talk soon. One way to reach me, I'm on Twitter at Julia Satov, or on LinkedIn, message anytime. I'm on there quite a bit, posting a lot of things on D&I and learning. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you, or evening, everyone. Bye.